The wind howled through Harmony, Georgia, as Clara Thompson stumbled toward the edge of the old wooden bridge, her breath catching in her throat. Dusk painted the sky a bruised purple, and the swollen river below roared with a ferocity that drowned out her racing heartbeat. Her hands gripped the splintered railing, trembling as a wave of dizziness washed over her. An allergy attack, sudden and fierce, tightening her chest. She'd wandered too far from home, chasing a fleeting impulse, and now the humid air seemed to claw at her lungs. Alone, vulnerable, she whispered, "Not now," as shadows deepened around her. Then a low growl cut through the gloom, a sound both warning and promise. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Clara steadied herself against the railing, her hazel eyes scanning the dimness for the source of that growl. It wasn't the wind or the river, it was something alive, something close. She blinked hard, willing her vision to clear, but the tightness in her chest lingered, a cruel reminder of the allergies that had shadowed her life since childhood. She'd always been fragile, her body quick to betray her with sneezes or wheezes at the slightest provocation. Pollen, dust, or the damp Georgia air. Yet here she was, miles from the safety of her Tatey home, driven by a restlessness she couldn't name. It was September 28th, her third wedding anniversary with James, and he was away again, supervising a bridge repair in Savannah. The house had felt too quiet that afternoon, the ticking of the grandfather clock a hollow echo of her solitude. Clara had tried to fill the silence, baking peach cobbler, tending her azaleas, but an ache had settled in her chest, deeper than any allergy could reach. She dreamed of a dog since she was a girl, a loyal companion to share her days, but James's practicality always won out. "Your health, Clara," he'd say, his voice firm yet tender. "We can't risk it." She'd nodded, packed away her longing, and let logic rule. But today logic had faltered. The Harmony Animal Rescue sat just beyond the bridge, a squat building nestled among pines, its sign weathered but welcoming. Clara had passed it countless times, always with a pang of curiosity, and this afternoon, something snapped. She'd grabbed her keys, her antihistamines, and walked out the door, the humid breeze tugging at her auburn hair. Now, standing on the bridge, she wondered if this was madness or fate. The growl came again, softer this time, and Clara turned to see a pair of deep brown eyes glinting in the fading light. A German shepherd stood at the bridge's end, his coat a mix of black and tan, matted with burrs, but regal nonetheless. He didn't lunge or bark like the strays she'd encountered before. Instead he sat, his posture steady, watching her with an intensity that made her breath hitch, not from allergies, but from something else entirely. She squinted, noticing a frayed collar around his neck. He wasn't a wild dog. He belonged somewhere. "Hey there," she murmured, her voice shaky as she took a cautious step forward. The dizziness ebbed slightly, though her lungs still burned. The dog tilted his head, ears perked as if assessing her. Clara's heart thudded. She'd always believed dogs were more than pets, silent friends who understood the soul's quiet corners. This one, though, felt different. There was a weight to his gaze, a knowing that pierced through the evening gloom. Clara glanced back at the rescue building, its windows glowing faintly against the darkening sky. She'd meant to visit, to look, not to decide anything. But this dog, had he escaped? Was he waiting for someone? She took another step, and he rose, moving toward her with measured grace. No bounding, no frantic energy. Just a calm, deliberate approach that steadied her nerves. When he reached her, he sat again, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence, and pressed his nose gently against her hand. The touch was electric, a jolt of connection that made her gasp. Her fingers trembling from the cold and her fading dizziness brushed his fur. It was coarse yet soft, and she felt no itch, no sting, none of the warnings her body usually gave. She knelt, ignoring the damp wood beneath her knees, and looked into his eyes. They were deep, endless pools, reflecting a wisdom she couldn't name. "Who are you?" she whispered half to herself. The wind quieted, leaving only the river's distant rumble and the sound of her own breathing. Clara knew she should turn back, call James, apologize for this reckless detour. But as the dog leaned into her touch, closing his eyes in what seemed like contentment, she felt a certainty bloom inside her, a certainty that defied every careful plan she'd ever made with her husband. This wasn't just a stray, this was a moment, a choice, a thread pulling her toward something bigger. Footsteps crunched on gravel, snapping her from her reverie. A woman emerged from the shadows, her silhouette framed by the rescue's light. She was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled into a bun, her face lined with kindness and fatigue. "I see you've met Duke," she said, her southern drawl warm but tinged with amusement. "He'd been watching that bridge all day like he knew someone was coming." Clara stood brushing dirt from her skirt, her hand still resting on Duke's head. "Duke?" she echoed, tasting the name. It suited him. Strong, noble, timeless. "Does he belong to someone?" The woman, Ruth according to her name tag, shook her head. "Not anymore. Been here months. Folks want puppies or lap dogs. Not a big fella like him. He's calm, though. Different. Watches people like he understands 'em." She paused, studying Clara. "You okay, hun? Look a little pale." "I'm fine," Clara lied, forcing a smile. The dizziness had faded, but her chest still felt tight, a lingering echo of the bridge's terror. "Just caught off guard, I guess. I was heading to the rescue when Duke found you," Ruth finished, her eyes twinkling. "He's got a way of doing that. Want to come inside? Meet him proper." Clara hesitated, glancing at Duke. He looked up at her, unwavering, as if urging her forward. James's voice echoed in her mind. "Your health, Clara." But it was faint now, drowned by the pull she felt toward this dog. She thought of the empty house, the anniversary spent alone, the dreams she'd buried. Maybe this was her chance to reclaim something, to trust her heart over her head. "Okay," she said finally, her voice steadying. "I'd like that." Ruth nodded, turning toward the rescue, and Duke rose beside Clara, his presence a quiet anchor. As they crossed the bridge, the river's roar softened and the pines whispered overhead. Clara didn't know what lay ahead, whether James would understand, whether her body would betray her. But she knew one thing. Duke had found her for a reason. And whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The rescue door creaked open, spilling light onto the gravel, and Clara stepped inside, Duke at her side. Somewhere in that building, a decision waited. A decision that would unravel the life she'd known and weave something new. She felt it in her bones, a tremor of anticipation, and as Duke's tail brushed her leg, she wondered what secrets those brown eyes held, and what they'd teach her before the story's end. The air inside the Harmony Animal Rescue hung heavy with the sharp tang of antiseptic and the earthy scent of kibble, a blend that stung Clara Thompson's nose as she stepped through the creaky door. Dim fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale glow across rows of kennels where dogs barked and whined, their voices a restless symphony. Clara's chest tightened, not from allergies this time, but from the weight of being here, so close to a dream she'd buried deep. Duke padded beside her, his nails clicking softly on the concrete floor, his presence steady as Ruth led them toward the meet and greet area. The space was small, just a fenced-off corner with a worn bench and a scattering of chew toys, but it felt like a threshold to Clara, a line she was about to cross. Ruth unlatched the gate, her hands dazed from years of routine. "Go on in, hun," she said, her drawl softening the command. "He's all yours for a spell." Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing the frayed strap of her purse where her antihistamines waited. She'd come this far, past the bridge, past the dizziness, but doubt gnawed at her. What if James was right? What if this was a mistake? Duke nudged her hand, his nose cool and insistent, and she stepped inside, the gate clanging shut behind her. He didn't bound toward her like the other dogs, all frantic energy and wagging tails. Instead, Duke approached with a grace that seemed almost deliberate, his movements measured, his brown eyes locked on hers. He sat a foot away, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his fur, and tilted his head as if waiting for her to speak. Clara sank onto the bench, her knees weak from the day's strain, and reached out. Her hand trembled, but Duke met it halfway, pressing his head into her palm. The contact was warm, grounding, and she felt a shiver run through her, not fear, but something deeper, something alive. "He's different, ain't he?" Ruth said, leaning against the fence, her arms crossed. "Been here since spring. Folks pass him by, too big, too quiet. But I reckon he's been waitin' for the right one." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She'd seen dogs before, strays in Harmony's back roads, pets at neighbors' porches, but none like this. Duke's gaze held a stillness, an understanding that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't since her mama passed years ago. She stroked his fur, thick and coarse under her fingers, and waited for the familiar itch, the sneeze. Nothing came. "You ever think about taking him home?" Ruth asked, her tone casual but probing. Clara's breath caught. Home, to the neat little house with James's blueprints on the table and her azaleas out front. The thought sent a jolt through her, equal parts thrill and terror. I don't know," she murmured, her voice barely above the kennel din. "My husband, he worries. I've got allergies, bad ones." Ruth raised an eyebrow, glancing at Duke. "Don't seem to bother you now." Clara looked down at Duke, who'd closed his eyes, leaning into her touch with a sigh that rumbled through his chest. Ruth was right. No wheezing, no sting in her eyes. It didn't make sense, but it felt true. She thought of James, his steady hands and careful plans. The way he'd kiss her forehead and say, "We'll figure it out, darlin'." He'd hate this leap into the unknown. But as Duke's warmth seeped into her, Clara felt a spark ignite, a defiance, a hunger for something more than safety. The barking faded as she sat there, lost in the quiet between them. Duke opened his eyes, meeting hers again, and she swore she saw a question there, a plea. Her heart thudded loud in her ears. She wasn't ready to decide, not yet, but she couldn't walk away either. "Can I come back tomorrow?" she asked Ruth, her voice steadier now. Ruth smiled, a knowing glint in her eye. "Reckon he'd like that. I'll hold him for you." As Clara stood, Duke rose too, brushing against her leg, a silent promise to wait. She left the rescue with her pulse racing, the humid night wrapping around her like a cloak. Tomorrow. she'd face him again, and maybe herself too. The cicadas sang a restless hymn as James Thompson's truck rumbled into the driveway, the headlights slicing through the dusk that cloaked their Harmony home. He stepped out, a bouquet of roses cradled in one arm, his suit rumpled from the long drive from Savannah. It was their anniversary, and he'd cut his trip short, eager to surprise Clara with a quiet night. Maybe supper at Miss Ellie's diner, just the two of them. The house glowed softly, a beacon of order in the wild Georgia evening, but as he turned the key in the lock, a shadow moved inside, large and unfamiliar. "Clara, I'm home early." His voice died as he crossed the threshold. There she stood in the living room, her auburn hair catching the lamplight, and beside her sat a German shepherd, its brown eyes fixed on him with a calm that felt almost human. The roses slipped in his grip, petals brushing the hardwood floor. What's this?" he managed, his tone tight, a mix of shock and something sharper. Worry, maybe anger. Clara stepped forward, her hands twisting together, a nervous habit he knew too well. "James, this is Duke," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I met him at the rescue yesterday. I didn't plan it. I swear, but—" She faltered, glancing at the dog, who hadn't moved, his presence a steady anchor. James set the roses on the coffee table, his movements slow, deliberate, buying time to process. A dog. After all their talks, all his reasons, her health, the risks. "We've been over this, Clara," he said, running a hand through his dark hair, his engineer's mind already calculating. "Your allergies, they're no joke. You can't breathe right half the time as it is." His eyes flicked to Duke, taking in the size of him, the quiet power. "And this one's no lapdog. What if he makes it worse?" Clara's chin lifted, a spark of defiance flaring in her hazel eyes. "He hasn't. Not yet. I've been with him twice now, and I'm fine. Better than fine." She reached down, her fingers brushing Duke's fur, and he leaned into her, a silent vote of confidence. "He's different, James. I can't explain it, but I feel it. He's special." James exhaled, the sound heavy in the room. He loved her. Lord, he did. Her warmth, her stubborn streak, the way she'd hum gospel tunes while tending her garden. But this was reckless, a crack in the careful life they'd built. He stepped closer, studying Duke. The dog didn't flinch, didn't bark, just watched him, those eyes deep and unreadable. Then slowly Duke rose and approached, sitting before James with a dignity that made him pause. "He's not jumping all over you," Clara said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "He knows how to be gentle." James frowned, but he couldn't deny it. Duke's calm was unnerving, almost deliberate. He reached out, hesitant, and rested a hand on the dog's head. The fur was warm, solid, and Duke pressed into the touch, a low rumble of contentment vibrating through him. "Clara," James said, softer now, the edge gone from his voice, "this ain't a small thing. A dog's a commitment, vet bills, time, and your health." He trailed off, meeting her gaze. She looked alive, more than she had in weeks, a light in her eyes he hadn't seen since summer. It tugged at him, that spark, but the worry lingered, a shadow he couldn't shake. "I know," she said, crossing to him, her hand finding his. "I should have waited, talked to you. But when I saw him, it was like he picked me, not the other way round. Just give him a chance, please." Her plea hung there, fragile and fierce, and James felt his resolve waver. Duke shifted, resting his head on James's knee, and a reluctant chuckle escaped him. "One night," he said finally, his tone gruff but yielding. "We'll see how it goes." But if you start sneezin' or wheezin', he's out." Clara's face lit up and she threw her arms around him, the roses forgotten on the table. Duke stayed put, watching them, a quiet witness to their fragile truce. Outside, the cicadas droned on, and James wondered what he'd just agreed to, and what this dog would mean for the life they'd so carefully planned. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of the Thompson home in Harmony, Georgia, casting delicate shadows across the hardwood floor where Duke lay sprawled, his black and tan coat gleaming faintly. Clara bustled in the kitchen, the scent of brewing coffee mingling with the sticky sweetness of the peach cobbler she'd left cooling on the counter. It had been 3 days since James grudgingly agreed to let Duke stay the night, and somehow that night had stretched into a tentative truce. Duke's presence filled the house with a quiet rhythm, his soft snores at dawn, the click of his nails as he followed Clara from room to room, a shadow she hadn't known she needed. James sat at the breakfast table, his blueprint spread out beside a half-empty mug, his brow furrowed as he sketched adjustments for a bridge project. He'd softened toward Duke, though he wouldn't admit it outright. The dog had a knack for fitting into their lives without disrupting the order James prized. When Clara shuffled in her slippers on chilly mornings, Duke fetched them before she could ask, nudging them toward her with a gentle nudge of his nose. He skirted the delicate vases from James's mother, gifts from their wedding, and never once disturbed the expensive rug they'd bought on a whim in Atlanta. Clara watched him now, marveling at how he seemed to understand the unspoken rules of their home. "You're staring at him again," James said, not looking up from his papers, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. Clara laughed, a sound light and unguarded, and set a plate of cobbler in front of him. "Can't help it. He's smarter than most folks I know." James grunted, cutting a bite with his fork. "Smart don't mean he's good for you. You been sneezin' yet?" She shook her head, her auburn hair catching the light. "Not a bit. Told you he's different." She wasn't lying. Her allergies, usually a constant hum of irritation in George's humid grip, had stayed quiet since Duke arrived. No itchy eyes, no wheezing fits, just a strange, steady calm she couldn't explain. She'd expected James to push back harder, to demand Duke leave after that first night, but he hadn't. Maybe it was the way Duke greeted him at the door each evening, tail wagging just enough to signal respect, or how he'd curl up near Clara's feet while she read A Silent Guard. James wouldn't say it, but Clara saw the shift in his eyes, a flicker of trust, reluctant but real. Duke rose then, stretching with a low groan, and padded to Clara's side. He pressed his head against her leg, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of checking in. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the warmth of him, and a memory surfaced, her mama's old hound, faithful through every storm. Duke was more than that, though. He carried a quiet power, a presence that filled gaps she hadn't known were there. James watched them, his pencil pausing mid-line. "He's growing on me," he admitted, voice gruff, "but I'm still watching you, Clara. One bad day, and we're done." She nodded, but her heart swelled. Duke wasn't just a pet. He was a piece of something bigger, a thread weaving into their lives. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the pines outside, Clara felt a certainty settle in her bones. Duke belonged here, with them. What that meant for her health, for James's careful plans, she couldn't say. But for now she let herself bask in the peace he brought, a peace that felt like home. The wind rattled the windows of the Thompson home that night, A restless gust sweeping through Harmony as Clara tossed in bed, her breath shallow and uneven. James was gone again, called to Savannah for an emergency repair, leaving the house eerily still save for the creak of settling wood and the distant hum of crickets. Duke lay at the foot of the bed, his ears perked, his brown eyes glinting in the moonlight that slipped through the blinds. Clara's chest tightened, a familiar ache blooming. Not loneliness this time, but something sharper, a wheeze she couldn't shake. She sat up, clutching the quilt her mama had stitched, and tried to steady her breathing. The air felt thick, heavy with the dampness that clung to Georgia's fall nights, and her throat scratched with every inhale. Duke shifted, his head lifting, and before she could reach for the glass of water on the nightstand, he was on his feet, nudging her arm with a low whine. His insistence cut through her fog, and she swung her legs over the bed's edge, bare feet brushing the cool floor. "Okay, boy," she whispered, voice catching. "I'm up." He led her down the hall, his step sure and deliberate, the click of his nails a steady beat against the hardwood. The kitchen glowed faintly under the stove light, and Duke stopped beside the counter where her herbal tea sat in a tin beside the sink, a chamomile blend she'd used since childhood to calm her allergies. Clara blinked, a chill running through her. She hadn't told him that. How did he know? Her hands trembled as she filled the kettle, the hiss of the gas flame mingling with the wind outside, and Duke sat close, his body a warm shield against the night's unease. As the tea steeped, its floral scent curling into the air, Clara sank into a chair, cup cradled in her hands. Duke pressed his nose to her knee, his eyes searching hers, and she felt a prickle of something, wonder, maybe fear. He wasn't just smart. He was attuned to her in a way that defied reason. She sipped the tea, the warmth easing the tightness in her chest, and thought of James's warnings. He'd say this was proof, her allergies flaring, a sign Duke couldn't stay. But Clara saw something else. Duke hadn't caused this. He'd known what she needed before she did. The wind howled louder, rattling the back door, and Duke's head snapped toward it, a soft growl rumbling in his throat. Clara followed his gaze, her pulse quickening. The basement stairs lay beyond that door, a shadowed descent they rarely used. James kept tools down there, but it was damp, forgotten. Duke rose, positioning himself between her and the door, his stance rigid, ears flat. "What's wrong?" she murmured, setting the cup down. He didn't move, just stared, his growl deepening into a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. She stood hesitating, one hand on the table for balance. The basement had always smelled off, musty, earthy, but they'd ignored it, too busy with life to care. Now, with Duke's warning echoing in the quiet, Clara felt a thread of doubt unravel. Was it more than just a damp space? She took a step toward the door, but Duke blocked her, his body firm, his eyes pleading. "Okay," she said, retreating, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll wait for James." The tea cooled on the table as she sat again, Duke settling at her feet, his vigilance unwavering. The wind died down, leaving an oppressive stillness, and Clara's mind raced. Duke wasn't just protecting her from the night. He was guarding her from something she couldn't see. What lay below those stairs? What did he sense that she didn't? As moonlight faded into shadow, she knew one thing. Tomorrow, when James returned, they'd have to face whatever Duke was trying to tell them. For now, she leaned into his warmth, grateful for the guardian who'd found her in the dark. The midday sun beat down on Harmony, Georgia, its heat seeping through the cracks of the Thompson home as Clara stood at the top of the basement stairs, her hand hovering over the doorknob. A faint, musty smell wafted up, curling into her nostrils, and she wrinkled her nose, unease prickling her skin. Duke had been relentless all morning, pacing, whining, planting himself between her and this door with a stubbornness she'd never seen. James had returned from Savannah at dawn, his truck still dusty from the road, and now he knelt beside her, peering into the dimness below, his toolbox clanking as he set it down. "Something's got him riled," James said, glancing at Duke, whose ears were flat, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Clara nodded, her auburn hair sticking to her neck in the humidity. "He's been like this since last night. Wouldn't let me near it. Growled at me, James." Her voice trembled, not from fear of Duke, but from the weight of his warning. She'd felt fine after the tea, her breathing steady, but Duke's behavior gnawed at her, a puzzle she couldn't solve. James frowned, his practical mind already at work. "Basement's always been damp, probably just spooking him. I'll check it out." He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, but Duke lunged forward, blocking the stairs with his broad frame, teeth bared just enough to show he meant business. James froze, surprise flickering in his dark eyes. "Easy, boy," he muttered, stepping back. Clara grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "He's serious, James. Maybe we should listen." He sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Clara knew meant he was wrestling with doubt. "Clara, he's a dog, not a detective. Could be a rat or something down there." But his tone wavered, and she saw the flicker of uncertainty. He'd seen Duke's smarts, his quiet knowing. She pressed her case, voice soft but firm. "Last night, he led me to the tea when I couldn't breathe." He knew James. What if this is more than a rat? James relented, grabbing a flashlight from his toolbox. "Fine. I'll look, but he stays up here." He edged past Duke, who growled again but didn't follow, staying glued to Clara's side. The stairs creaked under James's weight as he descended, the beam of light slicing through the shadows. Clara waited, her heart thudding. Duke's warmth a steady anchor against her leg. Minutes stretched, taut and silent, until James's voice echoed up. "Clara, get down here. Careful, though." She hesitated, but Duke nudged her forward, his growl gone as if granting permission now that James was there. She descended, the air growing cooler, thicker, the mustiness sharpening into something sour. James stood by an old dehumidifier in the corner, its casing cracked, a puddle of stagnant water pooling beneath it. "Been busted a while," he said, shining the light on it. "No wonder it stinks. Damp as a swamp down here." Clara coughed, the smell hitting her lungs, and Duke pressed closer, his eyes darting to the walls. "Could that be it?" she asked, her voice tight. "What's making me sick?" James shrugged, but his brow furrowed, a crack in his usual certainty. "Maybe. Mold, mildew. Could mess with your allergies. We'll get it fixed." He turned off the flashlight, the darkness swallowing them again, and Clara felt a chill that wasn't just the air. Duke had known. Had he smelled it? Sensed it? As they climbed back up, Duke trailing her like a shadow, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that the basement held secrets they'd yet to uncover. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Harmony, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose as the annual block party buzzed in the Thompsons' neighborhood. Smoke from barbecue pits curled into the air, mingling with the laughter of kids chasing fireflies and the twang of a guitar from old Mr. Jenkins's porch. Clara stood near a picnic table, a glass of sweet tea in hand, the sticky warmth of Georgia's fall pressing against her skin. Duke stayed close, his head brushing her knee, his brown eyes scanning the crowd with a vigilance that hadn't eased since the basement discovery. James manned the grill nearby, flipping ribs with a practiced hand, his sleeves rolled up, a rare grin softening his features. The dehumidifier was hauled out that morning, replaced with a new one humming quietly below. But Clara still felt off, her chest tight, her breath shallow. She'd chalked it up to the lingering dampness, but Duke's restlessness told her otherwise. He'd been calmer since the fix, yet his gaze kept drifting to the house, as if something still lingered. "Clara, honey, you lookin' peaked," came a voice, warm and weathered. Evelyn, their elderly neighbor, shuffled over, her silver hair pinned back, a plate of cornbread balanced in her gnarled hands. At 72, she carried the wisdom of decades in harmony, her eyes sharp despite the lines framing them. She set the plate down, studying Clara with a knowing tilt of her head. "That dog of yours, he's something else, ain't he?" Clara smiled faintly, scratching Duke's ears. "He is. Keeps me on my toes." Evelyn chuckled, but her gaze lingered on Duke, who'd shifted to face the crowd, his ears twitching. "My grandmama used to say animals see what we don't. Spirits, sickness, trouble brewin'. Down here in Georgia we listen when they speak." Her words hung heavy, steeped in the South's old tales, and Clara felt a shiver despite the heat. Before she could respond, a wave of dizziness hit, her chest squeezing like a vice. She gripped to the table, tea sloshing over the rim, and Duke was on his feet, pressing against her, guiding her away from the smoky air toward a quieter corner. The crowd blurred, voices fading, but Evelyn followed, her steps slow but sure. "See that?" she said, nodding at Duke. "He knows." "You listen to him, girl." Clara sank onto a bench, Duke nudging her purse closer. She fumbled inside, finding her antihistamines, and popped one with a shaky hand. The tightness eased, her vision clearing, and she looked up to see Evelyn watching, her expression a mix of awe and concern. "He fetched that for you," Evelyn said, voice low. "Ain't no ordinary dog. What's he trying to tell you?" James appeared then, wiping his hands on a rag, his grin fading as he took in the scene. "You okay, darlin'?" he asked, kneeling beside her. Clara nodded, still catching her breath. "Just a spell. Duke got me through it." James glanced at Evelyn, then Duke, his jaw tightening. "That basement fix didn't do it, did it?" he muttered, more to himself than her. Evelyn leaned in, her voice a whisper. "Could be more than dampness, James. My daddy lost a cousin to bad air once. Mold hiding where you couldn't see. Duke's smelling something you ain't found yet." Her words sank in, heavy as the Georgia clay, and Clara felt a knot form in her gut. James stood, his practical mind wrestling with the old woman's lore, but the seed was planted. Duke rested his head in Clara's lap, his eyes pleading, and she knew they couldn't ignore him anymore. Whatever he sensed, it was real, and it was growing. The waiting room of Dr. Margaret Lee's clinic in Harmony, Georgia, smelled faintly of antiseptic and old magazines, a quiet hum of ceiling fans stirring the warm air. Clara Thompson sat stiffly in a cushioned chair, her hands folded over her purse, the leather creased from years of nervous gripping. Duke lay at her feet, his black and tan coat pressed against the linoleum, his brown eyes fixed on her, with an intensity that hadn't wavered since they'd left the block party 2 days ago. James paced nearby, his boots scuffing the floor, his dark hair mussed from running his hands through it, a habit Clara knew meant worry was eating at him. Her symptoms had worsened since that dizzy spell: shortness of breath, a persistent ache in her chest, moments where the world tilted without warning. She'd brushed it off as lingering effects of the basement's dampness, but Duke's behavior told a different story. He shadowed her every step now, nudging her away from the bedroom, the kitchen vents, anywhere but the living room where the air felt less heavy. James had noticed too, his skepticism cracking under the weight of Duke's uncanny instincts. "We're getting answers today," he'd said that morning, his voice firm as he'd loaded Duke into the truck beside her. Dr. Lee stepped into the room, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, her white coat crisp against her dark skin. At 63, she carried a calm authority honed by decades in harmony, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Clara James," she greeted, her southern drawl softened by professionalism. "Let's get you in." She glanced at Duke, a flicker of curiosity crossing her face. "He's coming too, I take it." Clara nodded, her throat tight. "He won't leave me." The exam room was small, its walls lined with charts and a faded poster of the human respiratory system. Clara perched on the table, the paper crinkling beneath her, while James stood by her side, one hand resting on her shoulder. Duke settled at her feet, his head tilted up, watching as Dr. Lee flipped through a clipboard of test results. "Your symptoms are getting worse," she began, her tone measured. "Wheezing, dizziness, fatigue. It's more than just seasonal allergies this time. We ran some blood work and—" She paused, a faint smile breaking through. "Clara, you're pregnant." The word hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. Clara's breath caught, joy surging through her, sharp and bright. Pregnant. A baby. She turned to James, whose eyes widened, a grin tugging at his lips despite the worry etched there. "A baby?" he echoed, squeezing her shoulder. "Lord, Clara." His voice broke and she gripped his hand, tears prickling her eyes. Duke shifted, pressing closer, his tail thumping once against the floor as if he understood. But Dr. Lee's smile faded, her expression turning serious. "That's not all. Pregnancy changes things. Your immune system's more sensitive now, and these symptoms, they're not normal. The basement fix might have helped, but something's still triggering you." She tapped the clipboard. "Your inflammation markers are up, and Duke's behavior, he's been avoiding certain spots in the house, hasn't he?" James nodded, his jaw tightening. "Bedroom, vents, won't let her near 'em." Clara's heart sank, the joy dimming under a shadow of fear. "What's that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Lee leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Could be environmental. Mold. Something airborne. Animals sense things we miss. I'm ordering more tests, but I'd suggest checking your house again, deeper this time." She glanced at Duke, who'd risen to his feet, his ears perked. "He's telling you something. Listen." Before Clara could respond, a wave of dizziness crashed over her, the room spinning like a carousel gone wild. She swayed, clutching the table, and Duke was there instantly, his body firm against her legs, steadying her as James lunged to catch her arm. "Clara!" he barked, panic lacing his voice. Dr. Lee moved fast, grabbing a stethoscope. Her hands calm despite the urgency. "Breathe slow, hon," she said, pressing it to Clara's chest. The spell passed, leaving her gasping, Duke's warmth a lifeline in the haze. "See that?" Dr. Lee said, stepping back, her eyes on Duke. He knew before it hit. "We need those tests pronto, and a full house inspection." James nodded, his face pale but resolute. Whatever it takes. As they left, Duke guiding Clara with gentle insistence, she felt the weight of it all. Joy, fear, and a growing trust in the dog who'd become their sentinel. Something was wrong, and Duke was the key to finding it. The Harmony sun hung low, casting long shadows through the pines as Henry Grayson's van rolled into the Thompsons' driveway, its sides emblazoned with Grayson Environmental Solutions, Savannah, Georgia. Clara watched from the porch, her arms crossed over her chest, the late fall breeze tugging at her sweater. Duke sat beside her, his ears forward, his brown eyes tracking Henry as the burly man stepped out, his graying beard bristling in the wind. He carried a case of equipment, meters, probes, sample kits, a scientist in work boots, summoned by Dr. Lee's urgent call. James met him at the steps, shaking his hand with a curt nod. "Thanks for coming quick," he said, his voice rough from a sleepless night. Clara's dizzy spell at the clinic had shaken him, stripping away the last of his doubts. "Doc says it's the house, something in the air. Duke's been acting like he knows where." Henry squinted at Duke, who'd risen to his feet, tail still but alert. "Heard that from the doc. Never seen a dog play inspector before. Let's see what he's got." Inside, the house felt different. Less a home, more a puzzle, with hidden edges. Henry sat up in the living room, his air quality monitor beeping as it hummed to life. "Starting with a baseline," he explained, his gravelly voice cutting through the quiet. "Then we'll dig deeper. Vents, walls, the works." Clara hovered nearby, her chest tight, not from symptoms this time, but from anticipation. Duke paced, his nails clicking, and when Henry moved toward the bedroom, the dog darted ahead, blocking the door with a low growl. Henry raised an eyebrow, glancing at James. "That's one of 'em, huh?" James nodded, arms crossed. "Yeah, bedroom, kitchen vents, basement, till we fixed it." Clara chimed in, her voice soft but firm. "He's been like that for days, won't let me near." Henry knelt, adjusting his meter, and Duke stepped aside as if satisfied the man understood. The device beeped, numbers flashing, and Henry's brow furrowed. "Higher particulates here. Something's off. Let's check the vents." They moved through the house, Duke leading like a silent guide. In the kitchen, he pawed at the vent above the stove, his growl deepening. Henry pried it open, peering inside with a flashlight, and whistled low. "Dark spots. Could be mold. Taking a sample." Clara's stomach churned, Evelyn's warning echoing in her mind. Mold hiding where you couldn't see. The basement came next, the new dehumidifier humming, but Duke lingered near a corner, nosing the wall. Henry's meter spiked again. Moisture's still high. Might have spread. Hours passed, the air growing thick with tension as Henry collected samples, swabs from vents, scrapings from drywall. "This ain't normal mold," he muttered, sealing a vial. "Toxic, maybe. Lab'll tell us, but it's in the system. Air's carrying it." James's face hardened, his engineer's mind clicking. "Whole ventilation?" Henry nodded. "Likely. Your dog mapped it perfect." Clara felt a chill, her hand resting on Duke's head. They'd moved to a temporary apartment that night, a cramped unit across town, hoping fresh air would help. But as she unpacked, a sudden cough racked her, sharp and deep, and Duke whined, pressing close. James froze, mid-unpacking a box. "That's it, we're calling Dr. Lee tomorrow." Clara nodded, fear coiling tight. The house was poisoned, but why wasn't she better? Duke's eyes met hers, pleading, and she knew the answer lay deeper. Something they'd yet to uncover. Something he'd been fighting all along. The sterile hum of Harmony General Hospital filled the small examination room where Clara Thompson lay on a narrow bed. Her auburn hair splayed across the pillow, her breathing shallow and uneven. A monitor beeped beside her, its steady rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos of the past 24 hours. James stood at her side, his hands clenched into fists, his dark eyes shadowed with exhaustion and fear. Duke sat by the bed, his black and tan fur pressed against the cold floor. His brown eyes locked on Clara with a vigilance that hadn't wavered since they'd rushed her here from the temporary apartment. Dr. Margaret Lee entered, her white coat slightly wrinkled from a long shift, her clipboard clutched tightly. The air quality report from Henry Grayson lay heavy on her mind, its findings, toxic mold in the ventilation system, confirmed by the lab just hours ago. But Clara's worsening condition had pushed them beyond that discovery into a new, sharper urgency. "Clara, James," she began, her voice steady but laced with gravity. "We've got the latest test back. The mold's bad, real bad. Spores were on your clothes, in your hair, everywhere you've been. It's why you're not getting better, even here." Clara's hand drifted to her stomach, the faint swell of her pregnancy a quiet promise beneath the hospital gown. "The baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. Dr. Lee nodded, her expression softening. "Baby's holding strong, but your system's taken a hit. Pregnancy's making you hypersensitive, lungs, immune response, all of it. And..." She hesitated, glancing at Duke, who'd shifted closer, his head resting near Clara's hand. "There's more. You're reacting to dander now. Animal hair." The words landed like a blow, heavy and final. James stiffened, his jaw tightening, while Clara's eyes widened, tears welling up as she looked at Duke. "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice rising. "Not Duke. He saved me. Over and over. He warned us about the house." Dr. Lee knelt beside her, her hand gentle on Clara's arm. "I know, hun. He's something special. But your body's in a perfect storm. Mold, pregnancy, and now this. We've got to cut every trigger to keep you and the baby safe." James ran a hand through his hair, his voice rough. "How long's this last? She can't be around him at all?" Dr. Lee straightened, her gaze firm. "Could be months. Till after the baby's born. Maybe longer if her sensitivity sticks. We can't risk it, James. Her inflammation's dangerous. Another attack could..." She didn't finish, but the silence spoke volumes. Clara sobbed, her hand burying into Duke's fur, his warmth a lifeline she couldn't bear to lose. Duke lifted his head, meeting her eyes, and there was a depth there, an acceptance, a quiet understanding that cut through her grief. He pressed his nose to her palm, a soft whine escaping him, and James turned away, his shoulders shaking. "There's a family," Dr. Lee said gently. "Out in Miller's Crossing, 30 miles off. They've got a big place, love dogs. Duke'd be safe there till we figure this out." Clara nodded, numb, the decision tearing at her, but she knew it was right. For the baby, for her. The goodbye came too fast. At the apartment, James loaded Duke into the truck, his leash taut as Clara knelt beside him, her tears soaking his fur. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll never forget that." Duke looked at her, his eyes steady, and then at James, as if entrusting him with her care. He stepped into the cab, calm and dignified, but paused, gazing back at Clara with a look that felt like a promise, a thread stretching beyond this moment. As James drove off, the taillights fading into the dusk, Clara sank to the ground, the emptiness swallowing her whole. The spring rain pattered against the windshield of James Thompson's truck as he drove through the winding roads of rural Georgia, 30 miles from Harmony, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It had been 2 weeks since they'd left Duke with the family in Miller's Crossing. 2 weeks of Clara's fragile recovery in the apartment, her coughs easing but her spirit dimmed. Then came yesterday. Clara collapsing alone, her breath stolen, neighbors rushing in after hearing an impossible bark. James couldn't shake it, that phantom sound, and now he was here, chasing a hunch too wild to name. He pulled into Miller's Crossing, a sleepy town of clapboard houses and sprawling fields, and found the family's address, a big white farmhouse with a red barn. But the windows were dark, the yard empty. A neighbor, an old man with a straw hat, leaned on a fence nearby. "They moved," he said, scratching his chin. "Week ago, up north somewhere. Left that big dog behind, though. Seen him roaming round here, looking lost." James's heart lurched. "German shepherd? Black and tan?" The man nodded. "Yep, dignified fella. Been gone a few days now." James thanked him and drove on, his mind racing. Duke, loose. Had he run? How? And Clara's collapse. Had he known? The questions gnawed at him, pushing him deeper into the back roads, the rain streaking the glass like tears. Dusk fell, the sky a bruised gray, and he parked near a quiet park, stepping out to search on foot. The streets were empty, the air thick with wet pine, and he felt foolish, until footsteps crunched behind him. 3 shadows emerged, men, rough-edged, their eyes glinting with menace. "Nice truck," one sneered, stepping closer, a knife flashing in his hand. James backed up, his heart pounding, no help in sight. "Just passing through," he said, hands raised, but they closed in, their intent clear. Then a growl ripped through the dark, a sound he knew, fierce and primal. Duke burst from the shadows, his fur matted and thin, his teeth bared, planting himself between James and the men. The attackers froze, fear flickering in their eyes. Duke's stance was unyielding, his growl a promise of consequence, and they bolted, vanishing into the night. James stood breathless, staring at Duke, thinner, ragged, but alive with purpose. "Duke!" he rasped, reaching out, but the dog tensed, his head snapping toward Harmony, ears forward. Before James could grab him, Duke bolted, a streak of black and tan disappearing into the rain, his pace urgent, driven. James scrambled back to the truck, adrenaline surging. Duke was headed home to Clara. He'd saved her once somehow from miles away, and now he'd saved James. The drive back was a blur, the road slick and endless, his mind spinning with wonder and dread. He reached the apartment just after midnight, the rain a steady drum as he burst inside. Clara sat on the couch, pale but awake, neighbors hovering, a paramedic packing up. "James," she whispered, her eyes wide. "I heard him, Duke. He barked, I swear it." He sank beside her, taking her hand, his voice trembling. "I saw him, Clara. He's out there, saved me tonight. He's coming back." Her tears fell mingling with his, and Duke's absence filled the room. A ghost of loyalty they couldn't grasp. The rain hammered on, and somewhere in the dark Duke ran, his mission unfinished, his heart pulling him toward the family he'd never truly left. The spring sun rose over Harmony, Georgia, bathing the Thompson home in a golden glow that softened the edges of the newly renovated structure. Clara Thompson sat in the garden, her chair nestled among blooming azaleas, their pink petals a vibrant contrast to the crisp white of her sweater. Her auburn hair framed a face still pale from months of struggle, but her hazel eyes shone with a quiet strength, a resilience forged through trials she'd never imagined. Beside her, a bassinet rocked gently in the breeze, cradling baby Grace, her tiny chest rising and falling with the steady breath of sleep. Duke lay at Clara's feet, his black and tan coat gleaming once more, his brown eyes half closed but ever watchful. A guardian restored to his post. The house behind them stood transformed, its ventilation system gutted and rebuilt. Every trace of toxic mold scoured away by a team of specialists Henry Grayson had called in from Savannah. The air inside was clean now, crisp and free of the invisible poison that had nearly stolen Clara's life and the fragile hope of their daughter. It had been a long road. Weeks in the temporary apartment, hospital stays, the wrenching loss of Duke, and his miraculous return. But here they were, a family whole again, the scars of their journey etched into the walls of this home and the bonds that held them together. James emerged from the back door, his boots thudding softly on the porch steps, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. His dark hair was tousled, his engineer's precision softened by the morning's peace. And he paused to watch Clara and Grace, a smile tugging at his lips. He'd changed, too, his practicality tempered by a faith in things he couldn't measure, a trust in Duke that had grown from skepticism to something akin to reverence. He crossed the garden, settling beside Clara on a wooden bench, and rested a hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "Looks like a good day," he said, his voice low, the southern drawl carrying a warmth that matched the sun. Clara nodded, her fingers brushing Grace's blanket, a soft knit Evelyn had made during those tense weeks of waiting. "It's more than good," she replied, her gaze drifting to Duke. "It's a miracle." James followed her look, his eyes settling on the German shepherd who'd defied distance, danger, and logic to bring them back together. Duke's return had been the stuff of legends whispered around Harmony's porches and diner counters. That rainy night, after saving James from the thugs in Miller's Crossing, he'd appeared at their apartment door, soaked and limping, his fur matted with mud and burrs. Clara had been sitting up, still shaken from her collapse, when his bark, real this time, pierced the storm. James had flung the door open, and there he was, tail wagging faintly, his eyes locking onto Clara as if to say, "I'm here. You're safe." Neighbors had gathered, marveling at the sight, and Evelyn, summoned by the commotion, had wept openly, clutching her rosary and murmuring about angels in fur. The vet had come that night, tending to Duke's injuries, a sprained leg, cuts from his journey, signs of hunger and exhaustion. "He'll pull through," she'd said, her voice thick with emotion. "Dogs don't do this. Travel miles, fight off trouble, unless it's love driving 'em." Clara had knelt beside him, her tears mixing with the rain on his coat, and James had joined her, his hand resting on Duke's head, a silent vow to never let him go again. Dr. Margaret Lee had unraveled the rest. Tests after Duke's return showed Clara's sensitivity to dander fading. Her body, freed from the mold's assault, had begun to heal, recognizing Duke not as a threat but as part of her survival. "It's rare," Dr. Lee had said, adjusting her glasses with a bemused smile. "Your system's rewired itself. Sees him as family, not a trigger." Clara had laughed through her relief, hugging Duke tight, his warmth a balm to the months of fear. Now in the garden, Clara traced a finger along Grace's cheek, the baby's soft coo breaking the morning stillness. Duke lifted his head, nosing the bassinet gently, his eyes soft but alert, as if checking on the newest member of his pack. James chuckled, sipping his coffee. He's still on duty, ain't he? Clara smiled, her heart full. Always will be. He knew about her before we did. Protected her when I couldn't. The memory of those dark days lingered. Clara's collapse. The phantom bark that had summoned help. Duke's impossible journey. Evelyn had called it divine, a story straight out of her grandmother's tales of guardian spirits walking the Georgia clay. James, once a man of blueprints and certainties, no longer argued. He'd seen too much. Duke mapping the mold, saving Clara from unseen poison, rescuing him from a knife in the dark. He's more than a dog, James said now, his voice quiet. He's ours. The garden gate creaked, and Evelyn herself appeared, her silver hair catching the light, a basket of cornbread swinging from her arm. At 72, she moved slower these days, but her eyes sparkled with the same fire that had urged Clara to trust Duke months ago. "Mornin', y'all," she called, her drawl rich and warm. "Couldn't stay away. Had to see this little one again." She settled beside Clara, peering into the bassinet with a grandmother's tenderness. "Grace, huh? Fits her perfect." Clara grinned, offering Evelyn a seat. "Couldn't have done it without you. Your stories, your faith." Evelyn waved a hand, her laugh a soft cackle. "Wasn't me, honey. Was him." She nodded at Duke, who'd risen to greet her, his tail wagging in a slow, dignified arc. "My Grandma Maud say he's an angel sent down, 4 legs and all. Watched over you like you was his own." James leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You reckon that's true, Evelyn? All those old tales?" She met his gaze, her eyes sharp. "I reckon truth's bigger than we know. He found you, didn't he? Crossed miles, fought trouble, barked when she needed savin'. Yeah, that's more than luck, James Thompson." He nodded, a rare softness in his face, and Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. Evelyn was right. Duke was their miracle, a thread of grace woven into their lives. The morning stretched on, the air filled with the hum of bees and the scent of azaleas, a peace Clara hadn't known in months, settling over them. Grace stirred, her tiny hand reaching out, and Duke nosed it gently, a low rumble of contentment in his chest. Clara watched, tears prickling her eyes, and thought of how close they'd come to losing it all, the mold, the hospital, the wrenching goodbye. Yet here they were, whole, because of a dog who'd refused to let them go. James set his mug down, his voice breaking the quiet. "Been thinking, we ought to do something with this. Help folks like he helped us." Clara turned to him, curiosity sparking. "What do you mean?" He rubbed his chin, a habit from his planning days. "A foundation, training dogs like Duke, medical alert ones. Could save lives, Clara. Folks shouldn't have to stumble into miracles like we did." Her heart swelled, the idea taking root. "You're right," she said, her voice firm. "He's a gift. Let's share it." Evelyn clapped her hands, her grin wide. "Now that's a legacy, y'all. Harmony's own hero, passing it on." They talked it over as the sun climbed higher. Names, plans, a future built on Duke's courage. Clara saw it clear, a network of dogs and families, lives touched by the same loyalty that had saved hers. Afternoon faded into evening, the sky streaking with amber and rose, and the Thompsons sat together, Grace cradled in Clara's arms, Duke at their feet. Evelyn lingered, her stories weaving into the dusk, and Clara felt the weight of their journey lift, replaced by a quiet joy. Duke rested his head on Grace's bassinet, his eyes closing, his duty fulfilled. He'd brought them here, through poison, through separation, through fear, to this moment of wholeness. The stars emerged, pinpricks of light above the pines, and Clara leaned into James, his arm wrapping around her. "We made it," she whispered, her voice thick. He kissed her forehead, his breath warm. "We did, 'cause of him." Duke sighed, a sound of peace, and Clara knew their story was complete. Not an end, but a beginning, a testament to love that crossed boundaries, defied odds, and found its way home. As night fell over Harmony, the garden held them close, a family bound by a dog who'd walk through darkness to bring them light. Duke's legacy would live on, in grace, in the foundation, in every heart their story touched. Clara closed her eyes, Grace's soft breaths mingling with Duke's steady presence, and thanked the stars for the guardian who'd made them whole. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.